Today I'll be demonstrating watercolor techniques with the assistance of a hairdryer in creating an abstract painting. Here you can see a completed abstract painting where I have created a harmonious composition utilizing analogous colors, which in other words are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. I've used everything from purple to magenta to red to orange to yellow. So because all these colors are next to each other on the color wheel, I know that more often than not those colors are going to look attractive together. How did I create this? Well, I did it using multiple techniques that I'm going to go over and created it in multiple layers. I used the hairdryer in between layers to not only dry the paint quickly, but to also move the paint in various directions. Let me show you how to get started with something like this. So I'm going to put this to the side and let's create another example right now. So I need a fresh piece of watercolor paper. This is a nice thick paper that's good for painting with watercolor. It has a smooth side and a rough side, and I like to paint on the rough side, so look closely before you attach it to your board. I need a board to attach my paper to, and I'm going to be using some masking tape to do that. Now, masking tape is too sticky when you first take it off of the roll. If you try to tape down your paper with the masking tape straight off of the roll, it will most likely rip and tear the paper when you try to remove it. So as I'm placing the masking tape, I'm trying to get a nice straight line so that I can have a nice straight clean border like this. Now this border is not perfect. There was parts where the paint got underneath the tape, but it is nice to have that border for framing purposes and just for display purposes. So what I'm doing, which you can't quite see, is I'm pulling the tape, and then after I tear it off the roll, I'm applying it to my jeans about 2 or 3 times at least to add a little bit of lint to it, to de-stick it just a little bit. And by doing that, I'm going to make sure that I'll be able to pull the tape off more easily and without hopefully ripping the paper. Now that's not a 100% guarantee. I still might get a little bit of paper that comes off with the tape, but if I do a good job, and if I'm a little bit lucky, I won't lose any paper. Now, because that paper's on the border, that's not a huge problem, but again, if you put the tape down without de-sticking it, without putting it on your jeans or your shirt to kind of remove some of the stickiness, chances are you'll rip some of the paper and actually create a tear across your paper as well. So you could ruin a nice artwork, otherwise nice artwork, by not making your tape less sticky. So I always show this part of the process because it's very important. And you can hear that sound of me attaching it and detaching it several times to my pants. All right. Now, each layer that I paint on this paper, you're going to see me add more tape, because as I add more moisture to the paper, it's going to resist and try to pull up off the board. Now, if I don't put any tape down, this is the result that you might get if you apply water to your paper. You can see how that would be impossible almost to paint on, okay? So this is going to maintain the shape of my paper and will keep it flatter than if I didn't use any tape. It still will want to get wavy, but that's okay because we're doing an abstract painting, so those waves can actually work for us. We can sort of play with that, all right? So now that I've got my paper taped down, I want to go ahead and wet this surface. Now, if we don't have any larger flat brushes, you can use the largest brush that you can find to apply water to your painting, okay? So what I like to do is a wet on wet technique. So what that means is I like to add a little bit of water. So I'm going to dip my brush just in the water. I'm going to wipe off some of the brush. I don't need a pool of water, but I do need a lot. And I'm going to go across this paper rather quickly. We don't have very many wide brushes like this, but if there is one available, it's a good thing to do, but otherwise just use the largest brush you can. Add a little bit of moisture there. And then once that paper is wet, and what I should have done already is added a little bit of water to my watercolor so it's ready to go, because this will dry quickly just from the air in the, just from the wind in the air, the breeze from the air conditioning, things like that. You do want to get your paint nice and moist, so you're going to add water, okay? And then The fun thing about painting abstract is that there isn't a right way and a wrong way to do it. You just kind of go with the flow, you go with the feel. You might want to listen to music as you're doing this, and that might inspire your brush strokes. And you can see that I'm applying some pure pigment to the paper, okay? And it's spreading out slowly as I fill the paper, as it reacts with the moisture that's already there. And so it starts to sort of bleed or puddle out from some of those areas. Okay. I think what I'm also going to do here is to create mostly a wash. I'd like to have mostly a yellow background here. So I'm actually going to use my brush and cover pretty much all of the white paper. And you can hear that sound from me painting over the paper. So it's already getting a little bit wavy. It's kind of getting a little bumpy. And that's okay when you're doing abstract work because, again, it's not going to look like anything from real life. Now, you might look at the painting I showed you earlier and think of maybe like a sunset or something like that, but that's not what I'm trying to paint. It's not a landscape. I'm not trying to make it look realistic. I'm just kind of having fun with color. And while it's still wet, or you can add more water with your brush, I'm going to go in here and add a few more highlights of yellow, put some pure pigment in there, get some nice little lines, some gradation where it's going from lighter to darker. So I get a nice range. Now, you have a couple of choices at this point. You can pick up your palette, your board, and you can start to kind of move the paint with gravity, and that might be fun to do to try and control it that way. I'm not seeing it move too much for me doing that right now, but that is a choice. Another choice you can do is just let it sit and let it dry slowly. And if you do that, especially if you're doing a wet on wet technique, you'll see that the paint and the color sort of gradually spreads out a little bit, all right? But I want to demonstrate using a hairdryer to sort of speed up the process. So if you have anything nearby, like paper towels or something that might blow away, you just want to secure those. You can just put them over under the corner of the board. Now I could keep using the hairdryer to dry it even more, especially if I wanted to do some more discrete shapes on top, meaning shapes with sharper edges. But because I'm going to be doing some soft blending with all of my colors, that's not really necessary. It's okay if things kind of mix together a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and jump in here with our next color, and in this case I'm going to be using some of the yellow orange and some of the orange, and we're going to be applying that here with, again, using a large brush. Now, at this point, I can either just do another layer of water, or I can start to sort of place the water a little bit more strategically if I want. Now, when you add more water, that's going to reactivate the paint that you already put down. Watercolor is interesting because it will come back to life when you add more water to it. So whatever color is already there you can move around a little bit more, and it'll get more washed out as you add more water because water will desaturate or lighten the color. It's usually a good idea to start with a lighter color and work your way to a darker color because when you do that, it's easier to cover up a lighter color than it is a darker color. So if I was to start with like my purple, it would be pretty difficult to get those other colors to cover that up. So you'd mostly just see purple. All right. So I just want to moisten my colors here. I'm going to be starting with the next lightest color, which is my yellow orange. Okay. And instead of sort of covering the entire surface like I did before, this time I'm going to sort of put it down into some sort of cloudy shapes. And as I'm moving my brush, I'm not trying to, I'm trying to sort of finesse my brush and sort of make some interesting little brush strokes. But I don't want the brush strokes to be super visible. So that's why I'm sort of moving the brush around, just kind of having fun, moving it in different sort of interesting ways to create different effects than I would if I was just trying to maintain like a lot of control and draw like a perfectly straight line. I'm kind of looking for more of like a cloudy effect. So I'm moving that color around pretty quickly, okay? And you can see up here it's bleeding. It's starting to blend in and spread out with the water, and down here not quite as much. So it does dry fairly quickly. I can always add just a little bit more water there. All right. And I am sort of thinking of clouds as I'm doing this, but you don't have to be thinking of anything. Like I said, it's mostly just about color and expression. So you can sort of think about a feeling that you're having. You can listen to music and try and paint along with that, sort of use the paint to sort of describe the feelings that the music has given you. I'm going to go in between some of these spots with some of the color. And you know what? While this yellow-orange is there, I'm just going to go ahead and start adding a little bit of orange as well. So I'm going to start to sort of darken some areas with the orange, and I'm going to start thinking about maybe setting up a little bit of separation here where it gets a little bit darker towards the corners and it's a little bit lighter between or across. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and start adding a little bit of orange here. Okay. And then we'll get back to the hairdryer here in just a second. All right, so I'm not going to add it everywhere. I don't want to cover up all of what I just did, but I want to add sort of some little flourishes of orange here just to kind of break up the space a little bit more, add a little bit more range of color, a little bit more value, start darkening those corners. As you can see in my other example, or in my example, we get fairly dark in a couple of those corners, but there is a good amount of orange and yellow sort of across the middle as well. So I'm only sort of starting to begin to darken those areas. All right, so it's going from lighter yellow in the middle to sort of more of orange, and then if you just add the pigment without too much water, that's one way to get it to be a little bit more saturated. It's very easy to desaturate by adding more water, and then to saturate or get pure color just by taking the moist pigment out of the watercolor and adding it where there's already some water. You can see there's some pooling going on where the water, so the hills are here, the peaks and the valleys are down here, so this would be like a little river. And that's going to happen with the watercolor, especially as the paper gets a little wavy. So let's see what we can do about that, or if there's anything we want to do about that. So I can move it around with a hairdryer. So I'm not going to get this totally dry right now, but I could if I went a little bit longer with the hairdryer. You can see how I was sort of pushing the paint away from the middle because I didn't really want drips or lines going here, like you can see the lines on the outside. I'm not going to add more tape to this. Right now it's doing a pretty good job of holding it down still, but if I let this dry overnight, the tape might start to lift off and I'd add some layers. And if I added tape right now with all the paint out here over on top of the tape, it's not really going to stick down too well. So right now everything looks like it's still stuck down pretty well, so I'm just going to keep going with it. If you do have any areas where there's a little bit of pigment stuck, you can always go in with a wet brush and try and move it around a little bit carefully. But again, every time you add moisture, you're going to desaturate an area. So if an area is too dark, you can change it by adding water, but then it might end up too light or with a sort of a wet spot, a lighter spot right there. I like how it's sort of very desaturated right here and then gets more saturated with the color. And I like how, again, it's sort of, I like it more when it has those softer edges than maybe some of the lines that are a little bit more clear, the edges that are a little sharper down here. So at this point, I think I'm going to go ahead and add some magenta to this. So I'm going to skip over the red for right now because I kind of want that magenta color that's sort of a little brighter. It's kind of like a pink with watercolor. A lot of watercolor sets, a lot of watercolor artists don't use white, so we wouldn't add like white and red together to make a pink, but here it does come with white in this set. Usually when people want white with watercolor, they just mask an area, they cover it with a liquid or tape, or they just don't paint that area. So this is still wet, even though I dried it with a hairdryer. I'd have to dry it longer to get it totally dry. At this point, I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit of magenta in here though, and I'm adding it without wetting the paper first, but I want to spread it out with water. So I'm not just wetting the entire surface now. I want a little bit more pigment to stay on top, but I am using water to move it around. Now if I waited at all, much time at all for that, then some of those lines would be very, very difficult to get rid of. All right, and I'm liking those colors that it's creating when it's pooling together here. You're getting the orange and the magenta mixing together, and that's kind of making more of a red. And I want to add some like little brush strokes around here, so it sort of breaks up the space, creates some interesting little negative spaces where you can kind of see through this color. And I'm going to move those little pools of color around with the hairdryer here in just a moment. Let's do the same kind of technique down here. So I'm going to just add some magenta right directly to my paper, so it's going to be pretty saturated. I'm just going to kind of start moving around. I'm starting to create that sort of division in the color composition where it's sort of darker in these corners, and then you're going to have this lighter streak going through. Okay, now I'm going to get a little bit of water on my brush, or actually a lot of water on my brush, I should say. And I'm going to start spreading that color out a little bit and then creating some negative spaces by sort of using some interesting little brush strokes. I wouldn't call this feathering, but I'm just sort of spreading out that color, so I'm diffusing that color a little bit into the middle area, but still kind of keeping these corners fairly saturated with color. And I'm even going to cover up some of those little orange spots that were in there. Kind of fill that in a little bit. It's kind of reminding me of the sun coming through the clouds in the morning. You know, maybe you're not feeling very good, or you're feeling pretty tired, but you go outside and you see that beautiful sunrise coming through the clouds, and you know, it's not so bad being up then at that point, because at least you're getting to see that beautiful light show. You know, I'm not a huge morning person, but I always appreciate a good sunrise, and maybe because I'm not a morning person, maybe because those sunrises are fewer and farther between for me, maybe that makes me appreciate them a little extra when I do see them. I am adding a little bit of red in some spots, and it is creating red just from mixing with the orange in some spots. And let me go ahead and get a little more magenta in some of those corners where it's turning a little redder. Okay. And this is going to be fun to move around, and you know what the heck, let's just go ahead and get some of that purple in here too while we're at it. I'm going to go pretty light with the purple. I'm not going to add a lot. I just sort of want some variation. I don't want this whole like little cloudy area to be magenta, and the purple is really nice for breaking up that magenta just a little bit. Okay, put more in the corner than anywhere else. And so at this point, what I want to do is, again, use my hairdryer, start moving things around, but of course, I want to remind you, we do have other techniques. If I start to use gravity, if I hold the board in different directions, I can move the paint around that way, so that might be more ideal, especially if you like those drips. I love it when it starts mixing together like that, but I think I kind of want it to go away rather than towards the middle. Okay, and then let me go ahead and use this hairdryer again, so it's going to get loud here in a second. Now this is not dry yet, but I do want to demonstrate a couple things. So I'm not super happy about these shapes being a little more distinct or having sharper edges than these ones. So again, remember, you can add a little bit of water even after you've gone in with the hairdryer or something, and you can kind of spread those areas out, but then remember that it's going to be desaturated because you added the water. You can try drying your brush on a paper towel and just using a little bit of water to try and move them around, but it's not a perfect science trying to do that. And one area that I want to sort of maybe think about doing a little bit more blending is this middle area. Again, if you have a larger brush, you can see what kind of happens when you go in with a little bit of water. You can kind of blend things together a little bit, but then it also gets a little desaturated, meaning it gets a little bit lighter. So you might not like that, but it's fun to experiment. It's fun to try things. Don't be a scaredy cat. You can always make another painting, right? And you can keep adding layers, right? So I think I want a little more purple, maybe up here in that corner. Maybe a little bit more purple down here in this corner. And again, I want to sort of be careful about how I'm controlling my brush. I don't want it to look too much like brush strokes. I just kind of want to move that paint around a little fluidly. Maybe add a little bit more water here so they start to bleed a little bit more, blend with the other parts. And then, you guessed it, hairdryer time. And you can see that I'm trying to control the movement of the water because I'm trying to move it out of this area in the middle so I can keep that lighter color. And it's kind of fun to chase that water around, try and get it to go where you want it to go. And as you saw right there, you can even mix the techniques a little bit. Now the hot air does dry it faster, but you are at risk of making the paper a little wavier. But it does help to turn the hot air on instead of the cool air if you're trying to get it done fast. And you can go in there with a brush as you're working. Just again, watch out that you're not crossing the streams here, that you're keeping the water far away from the electrical outlet and where it's plugged in. Now I could have let this dry, I could have put this in the drying rack before drying it, that last step, but then if I had done that, it would have started to drip because the drying rack often leans in a certain in a particular direction. So I didn't want that to happen, so I wanted to dry it more. Now you can still see some shiny parts, and I'm going to go ahead and dry those before I put this away in the drying rack or in my drawer, but I'm going to go ahead and stop there. This has, again, been a demonstration of how to create an abstract painting using watercolor with the aid of a hairdryer. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions.